but perhaps another time we can be together in person. I want to just say thanks to Becky for coordinating this and inviting us to this meeting. Thank you, Judy, also, and everybody for inviting us. I'll just give a very brief introduction of myself. I'll toss it to my colleague and friend and collaborator, Orr, and then we'd like to tell you a little bit about the context of this public art project and a little bit of the project overview, where we are today, and then, as Judy said, take some questions. So my name is Marcus Young. My Chinese name is Yang Mo. I use he or any pronouns. I'm originally from Hong Kong and grew up in Des Moines, Iowa, of all places, and came to Minnesota thanks to Carleton College, where I studied music. Wow. So I was a music major there, and then came to the Twin Cities to study theater at the University of Minnesota, where I did my graduate work, and liked it so much I've stayed, and I'm now in Minnesota 35 years.
Wow.
So more than half my life. And I call myself a behavioral artist. And that just means I bring my art as close as I can to life, so that we're looking at your actions and your thoughts and all the intimate things of your life and your lives can enhance how your awareness, so that almost anything that you can look at and see and do may be considered art. So that's why I had to come up with a new term called behavioral art. So I'd like to pass it to Orr to do an introduction.
And Aura, I'm sorry that I said Laura, if you go by Orr, excuse me.
That's okay. Hi, everyone. Nice to meet y'all. And thank you so much for having us, and Becky for arranging a little time for us to hang out and talk with you guys. And yeah, I'm Orr. Laura is also fine. I go by both, they, them. I have worked with Marcus for about the past 6 or 7 years. My background is predominantly in dance and movement arts. And I say movement arts in a sort of very broadly encompassing sphere. I also do a lot of work as a cultural organizer. And similar to Marcus's description of behavioral art, I tend to approach relationships as I think one of the highest art forms. It really takes a lot of creativity for relationships to thrive in this world that we're in. I've lived in Minneapolis for, about 7 or 8 years now, and was in St. Paul for a few years before that. So I grew up in Denver. I think I'll leave it there, since our time is brief, and we want to make plenty of time to tell you a little bit about what we're up to and hear your questions. So I'll stop there.
I'll say that we did not prepare a visual presentation today because we wanted to get to the question and answers and mostly have a conversation with you. If at another time you're interested in our past work, we can certainly do a visual presentation. We're at a place in our process where we're still at the conceptual and the sort of ideation phase at the moment. We're going to tell you a little bit about the background and context of where we're at, and a little bit about what Orr and I do in our group we call Don't You Feel It Too? It's an outdoor movement practice, and then get to the project as well. So very briefly, the background is, and I want to say I'm calling this a public art project inspired by the life of Brenda Ueland. And I just want to make a slight distinction between a public art project and a memorial. So, and we can have a discussion about that, but thinking about it as a public art project inspired by the life of Brenda Ueland. So in March of 2017, so this is more than 5 years ago, I was contacted by a developer named Andrew Commerce. And he was telling me about this project 5 years ago, about the building that was the home and the building that was at 2620 West 44th. And there was a whole process between the developer and the city about assessment of the house or analysis of the house and any historical value. All that happened before we were contacted. So Of course, that was 5 years ago. And then we were getting ready. It took quite a while for things to sort of get going. And when we were finally asked to start, which was in 2020, it was right before the pandemic. And so we had a chance to meet with several community members early on in 2020 before the pandemic started. And then of course, everything came to a halt. So now in 2022, we are ready to restart. And we just signed a contract with Andrew, so we are able to begin the project. So that is just a very brief overview, just in case some people are here for other agenda items and may not be as focused on this particular project. I just wanted to give everybody a little background. And I want to toss it to Orr to say a little bit about Don't You Feel It Too, which is our movement practice. So you have a sense of where we come from.
Yeah, so just to say a little bit more about kind of our core project that Marcus and I steward. So Don't You Feel It Too is a 14-year ongoing living public art project. It started in 2008, and it's a form of movement and engaging really engaging our inner lives in public space, in all of the complicated layers that entails and the beautiful layers that entails. And we have really been exploring this movement form for the last 14 years and shaping a lot of our understanding of art making and community making around this form. So I think Marcus just dropped our website in the chat, which is a great place to go to get a little bit more, if you're curious about it, to get a little bit more familiarity with that particular work that we steward. And also, if you'd like to get involved, we do host a number of public events. I'd say our public practices and our kind of outward-facing presence has shape-shifted and diminished a little bit since COVID. We used to host hundreds of public practices a year in outdoor spaces all over the cities. We had downtown on Nicollet Mall. We used to be on the U of M campus by the Weisman Art Museum a lot. Powderhorn Park. We've taken practices to George Floyd Square. So that has, again, had to sort of ebb and flow with the times. But if you'd like to get a little bit more of a taste of that work and what we do and even what it looks like, because it is maybe a little hard to imagine as I'm describing it, the website is a good place to go. And yes, I see a shout out for Dr. Joy in the chat. And we have been super lucky and super blessed to work with a lot of incredible partners over the years. And I think that there's some more info on that on our website as well.
I'll just add also that as background, I was a city artist in the city of St. Paul for 9 years and helped develop the Sidewalk Poetry Project, in case you're familiar with that. And then we just finished a 2-year term with the Department of Transportation here in Minnesota. So there's interesting artwork created in public in different ways. Mm-hmm. So if you don't know a little bit about Brenda Ueland, she was a writer and editor and a teacher. I think you could easily say that she is a firebrand, an iconoclast. Maybe in a more contemporary term, you would call her a badass. I'm glad to see Eric here, who can help fill in gaps since I'm still learning and reading about her. And Brenda lived at the 2620 location. Wasn't her only place of residence in the Twin Cities. I love knowing that she set an international swimming record in her 80s and was knighted by the King of Norway. So like, how is that possible? It's amazing, amazing, inspiring person. I'll turn it to Orr to say a little bit about thematically what our project is going to be touching upon.
But you're muted, Orr.
Yeah, sorry, y'all. I lost my mute button for a second there. So as Marcus and I get to know Brenda Ueland's memory and really who she was as a person and a public figure and a writer and an artist, we are really excited to sort of shape our work around the themes of her life and her work and her writing. And so as we get to know her, some of the thematic strands that we're pulling out are her really profound sort of, I would say, pedagogy almost around deep listening and the art of listening. Her, listening as it relates to transformative conversations and the power of transformative conversations. And then, of course, her encouragement for people to write and for really anyone to develop a writing practice or a creative practice. So reading, writing, deep listening, the art of conversation, and also a semi-audacious approach to public art that seems very in line with who we are getting to know that she was.
And I'll add that in our preparations, Or and I have been meeting with various groups and people in the neighborhood. So we've been in touch. I think I see Teresa is on this call. So we've been in touch with the library, Wild Rumpus, Dunn Brothers, the Lake Harriet Spiritual Community, and then several people perhaps on this call today who are members or active with the history study group. So we're excited to keep getting to meet new people like yourself, and we'll do quite a bit of like a robust kind of meeting and engaging with community members. So I'll ask Or to start us off on 3 main components of this public art project that we're starting to develop and ideate and conceptualize right now.
Yeah, so as Marcus, I think, just said, we have sort of a 3-part approach that we're looking at for this project. And I think some of you may have seen the project description, so hopefully this is helpful information and not too much repeated. But the first sort of most physical category of this project will be some neighborhood art objects around and about Linden Hills. So again, working with these partners like the library and Wild Rumpus, potentially a coffee shop, and others around the community that we are starting to connect with. We want to create a very beautiful, artful vessel, probably a box of some kind, that really can serve as sort of a traveling exhibit that honors Brenda Ueland, that really centers her writing, and also brings forth some of the creativity and like calling that out in people, the calling forward of the writer and the creative spirit in people that it seems Brenda Ueland was so good at. And so this box will be filled not just with Brenda Ueland's writings, but perhaps with things like conversation cards or, prompts to encourage people to follow their own sort of wild dreaming and imagination as they write. Could be things like, almost like parlor games, like also to help sort of encourage people to engage with one another in public space, again, kind of along this line of deep listening and artful conversation that Brenda Ueland writes so much about. And so our vision is that we will work with an artist to design a very beautiful and of course very durable box or container that all of these things can live inside of, and that really sort of integrates itself into the life of the neighborhood and can be, not just a visual art object, but also something that very much is designed for people to interact with and derive joy and connection and fun and whimsy and a little bit of perhaps surprise. So Marcus, do you want to say anything else about that aspect?
Yeah, I think we're approaching this, we're calling it a distributed neighborhood art objects. So distributed meaning that it's an object that has many pieces that can live in multiple places around the neighborhood so that you can see connections from one place to another and feel a presence of these art objects that accumulate or collectively create a different kind of presence, as opposed to a single object that lives in one place, multiple, sort of a series of objects or multiples that can be placed in multiple places. For a previous development, I created what I call the dispersed sculpture, which was hundreds and hundreds of brass bees. And we placed these tiny bees all throughout, inside and around a building, a new apartment complex. And so it was like a single sculpture that had hundreds of parts to it that could occupy space very differently than a single sculpture. So we're playing with this idea of a distributed neighborhood set of art objects. That's our first of 3 components. A second component is much more like engagement. How do we hold pop-up events for local knowledge and supporting local knowledge? So I alluded to having met with some of the members on this call here in the March of 2020, and we shared tea and we had conversation. And so I was imagining a type of tea house that could be a pop-up event to stimulate local knowledge. We would read Brenda Ueland together. We would talk about what is important and maybe even sticky and challenging neighborhood issues, and have a place for processing some of these stickier issues in the neighborhood. So that's a second component, are these pop-up events that could take a shape of a tea house, but they could be walks or a movement. Right now, we're still very open to the ideas of how to engage and what kind of events would serve the fostering of more local knowledge. And with that, I'll ask Or to talk about the final of the 3 components, which we call the circles with writers.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so speaking of local knowledge, Brenda Ueland, of course, was a very prolific local writer, local author, of which we have many, and we are really blessed in the Twin Cities to have an incredible array of brilliant local writers. And so we want to bring some of those folks together, not just to speak in the Linden Hills neighborhood, but to have a conversation with each other, which is so beautiful. And so it's really moving and engaging in a different way to watch 2 writers engage with each other. And so our desire is to bring local writers together in circle form, sort of slightly more communal feeling, slightly less formal speaking event at locations around the neighborhood to talk and to invite witnessing audiences to come and listen and learn from some of the brilliant creative folks that we have in these cities where we live.
And then lastly, we want to just invite you all to ask us questions. And we also have questions for you. So we're going to toss a few out and then open it to anybody to ask a few questions. Our questions for you is, you heard the list of people that we've been talking to and reaching out to. Who else should we connect with? What other businesses or events should we know about in your community? And are there certain current sticky neighborhood issues, challenging issues that we might be able to support with our pop-up events that are meant for deepening local knowledge? So those are some questions for you that you don't have to answer them now. You can always send us something maybe through Becky. But we'd love to take a few of your questions and maybe hear several at a time before we answer. So please just feel free to ask any question you'd like. You
can put your hand up or use the little yellow hand in the whatever they call it, emojis that do that. So you're opening that for questions now, Marcus, is that right?
Yes, thank you.
From this group, okay, all right. Anybody want to start with that? There is a series of questions that has come up in the chat.
Okay.
And I'll read it. Okay, but there's several questions in it. Were you listening to those of us who met with you in 2020? Everyone emphasized the desire for a permanent art project that is visible to a wider public. How long will these boxes last? And how will people outside the neighborhood see them? People in North Minneapolis or St. Paul won't go to the Linden Hills Library. How long will the pop-ups be around? So that there's a cluster of questions there. Okay.
Yeah. And then I see another one down here. It says, could the circles be done by the library for little cost at any time?
Mm-hmm.
And then let's see, someone says, Alex, if, oh, this is for someone else maybe. Okay.
No, it is I think Minneapolis's, Brenda's only living descendant. She has ideas for a memorial. That's, yeah.
I see, okay, great. Okay, so let's see. Yes, we met with several people, and yes, we were listening very carefully to everybody. It was, I thought, a wonderful conversation. I heard a lot of variety of points of view, in fact. And how long will these boxes last? So we have certainly a criteria that the city sets forth. I believe it's maybe 7 or 9 years. Anything that's considered a work of permanent art has to last at least 7 or 9 years. So that's, I believe, a city's standard. And let's see, how will people outside the neighborhood see them? So the idea is not just a single box, but a box that relates to these distributed art objects that will be around in multiple sites throughout the neighborhood. They will be mostly indoor sites. So you'd have to see them if you went into, for example, this is all preliminary, went into a Dunn Brothers or went into the Wild Rumpus or went into the library, or that's why we're hoping to get some ideas from you all of who might we want to approach. So the idea of a distributed art object is that you catch glimpses of the art objects in different places in the neighborhood and hopefully start to see the connection, or like a scavenger hunt or a treasure hunt, you start seeing things that look a little bit out of place and you're wondering what that is. And so through local storytelling or local conversation, you would then find out what they're about. And that would connect, that thematically, that would connect to the box itself. Let me see if I catch up. How long will the pop-ups be around? So the pop-ups are more like community engagement or neighborhood engagement. So they would be for this year only, as a part of the process of the making of the art. Those are not permanent. It's more of the community engagement. Let's see, what was another comment or question?
Let's see.
If anybody wants to just raise your hand, we can see everyone now. So if you don't know how to use the little hand raising function, you can
just put your actual hand up.
Put your hand up and we can call on you, because I know there's many people here.
I don't want to miss this other.
Go ahead, Joe Ellen.
Oh, sorry. I just don't want to miss this other question. Someone asked about the circles and the library. So we're excited to work with the library. We're talking to the library now to see how we can collaborate and to understand if they have a speaker series. Ours would not replicate what they do, but definitely we would work with the library.
Okay. Joellen?
Well, as a retired librarian, it really seems like your proposals are things that would really be complementary to a library to do. It is not what some of us who met with you before, and we did say at that point, we really were interested in something that was more permanent. It's true that, for saving your taxes and things like that, it's 7 years, but, I really want to see something much more permanent than that. And perhaps, there'd be a way we could collaborate and get some fundraising so that your proposals and, working with the library, that they could happen. But for those of us who, were so inspired by Brenda, we're really looking at something more like a statue. And I don't know if anybody else from the group would like to say something. Eric, do you want to speak?
Sure. Am I on?
Yes.
Yes.
Hi. I'm Brenda's step-grandson. We met when I was 12 and she was 55. And then we had a relationship that lasted until the day before she died at home at 2620 West 44th at 94. she used to say she ran around Lake Harriet twice a day, once for the body and once for the soul. And she was definitely the lady of the lake. And, you know, we've talked about, these are delightful ideas that Orr and Marcus are saying. And I think many who've been listening tonight don't know about Brenda or her legacy. And so this is coming as new information. I think there's some way to combine these. And what Marcus has done in St. Paul with the sidewalk poetry is delightful. I think these things would kind of build an interest toward the city or the park board doing something more permanent. I don't think the $70,000 that the developers offered the city in exchange for being able to demolish her house was sufficient to do a great memorial. But it's, you know, it certainly would be enough to, we've priced a sculpture and that would cost $45,000 for a bench with a sculpture by the lake. We've imagined a figure sitting on the bench with her hand cupped to her ear listening, and a quote on an open book that's from Brenda's wonderful essay that she wrote in that home that starts out, listening creates us, makes us unfold and expand. That a listening bench could be a delightful thing out of the flow of the traffic around Lake Harriet. And that would be a way to pique people's interest, and they could then pursue finding out more about Brenda. I think a website should be created where people could access her stuff. Brenda used to dress outrageously, and there should be an annual ball where people are invited to dress as Brenda did. Brenda used to say she had 3 husbands and 100 lovers, but she never had a love affair with a married man unless he brought a note from his wife, and she actually got one once, and it said, "You can have him." And so, and she, you know, she lived, she had a female partner as well as 3 husbands and a daughter. So she was a rule breaker. And I think it would enlarge all of our lives if we got to know her better. And so how could that happen? And it's a natural that it happened in Linden Hills. She grew up on the edge of Bede-Makaska and spent her first 20 years there, and then came back when she was in her 30s and lived there until her father died. And then she moved to Linden Hills. She used to walk around the city 20 miles on her walks. And so she was and she had a column in the Minneapolis paper for a decade, and everybody knew her. So I think a call for, that Orr and Marcus are brilliant artists, but I think this project deserves putting out a call for artist proposals. And I think a whole bunch of people all over the planet, not just in Linden Hills or Minneapolis, but all over the planet rallied to save her house. But it wasn't because they were trying to save her house. They were trying to honor her legacy. And that should be done. And I think putting out a call to artists is a way to start it. And those people who know her legacy should help judge which ones are the most appropriate and the most exciting and the most informative for people to learn about Brenda. I think Marcus and Orr are doing a wonderful job given the circumstances, but you know, the developers, I'll bet they're surprised that they have control of this process and that they can own this process, as one of the people from the city said. It should be owned by the city. It should be owned by the people or the park board. And I've said enough, but.
Okay.
Thanks for this opportunity.
Thank you.
And I'd like to point out that in the 5 years, a building that was supposed to be 10 units turned into 36 units and is now almost fully occupied. So that happened in those 5 years. So there's no reason why this project needs to be taking so long.
Okay. Catherine Lundquist, did you have your hand up?
Well, all I was going to say to Eric and everyone is Brenda also was a member of Linden Hills UCC Church. She was one of the founding members. So I knew Brenda through the church personally when I moved into the neighborhood and just had lots of fun working with her. So I just wanted to mention that if that's anything that could go into the project in one way or another. Okay.
I'm going to call on you, Jolene, in just a minute. I'm seeing that this is going to be a much longer conversation, not tonight necessarily, but I see because of the time that has passed, the issues that were unresolved from the beginning. Eric, you put those so very nicely. But there's a lot more to be thought about and spoken, I would say, in memory of her about listening. And I hope that, we can take a couple more questions here, but I hope that we can facilitate more conversation about this project. It sounds to me like Marcus and Orr that you are, as you say, in the ideation portion of it, that at this moment, it has the frame of the $70,000 that has been given by John Gross and whoever this other person is. I'm hearing very different things coming about the scale, that it could be the scope. So that's my hope, is that we could facilitate at least more conversation on this subject. Jolene, you had a comment.
Yes, I'd like to suggest that a task force be formed, and perhaps it could be under Link, just because there's money involved in it, and usually you need some sort of structure. But there really is, I don't feel like Marcus and Orr particularly heard us at the meeting, 2 years ago, because really what they proposed now is very similar to what they proposed back then. So I really would like to have more voices that have more equal clout.
Okay.
I would just like to quickly respond to that. Actually, we did hear you. We may not have agreed with you 100%, but we heard you. And I think some of the discomfort that, we are still having, I suppose, is because your love for the legacy of Brenda is coming up as something that you want specifically, and it is a type of art and a type of artist that I am not. And so, in a way, the disagreement is with the process that has come to select me as the artist, and I am unfortunately not in control of that process. And so I just want to very plainly respond to that, and want to say that I am here to listen, and to continue to listen, and to continue to stay engaged in conversation. I hope that helps a little bit, but thank you for a moment to respond.
Okay. Any other questions or comments at this time? Because I do have to close it off here in a moment. Becky, I can't hear you.
Paul Strickland has his hand up.
Oh, I'm sorry, Paul.
No, that's okay.
Paul, where is he? I see. No, I don't see him. Where is Paul?
Can't hear you, Paul.
There he is. There
My wife says that she's going to put on my tombstone, Paul, you're on mute. I'm joining you this evening from Maine. And part of the thing that I want to argue for, and by no means are any of my comments about or against or discounting the artistic initiatives that I've heard described tonight, but I would really like to argue for a permanent honoring, and I don't know what that would be, sculpture, stone, something that would honor Brenda's legacy, and the fact that she doesn't only belong to you in Minnesota. She belongs to all of us and around the world. people would love to have a place to come and to honor her. I lived at 4940 Colfax for 32 years and actually chose Minneapolis as a place to live before we moved to Maine in our 1830s farmhouse and living here on a farm. And I just want to make one last point here is that at least on the East Coast, historical societies are a really big thing because of the, just the nature of the locations. There's an island off the river half a mile from me where Champlain and his men landed in 1604. But what I'd like to argue for is that the history that is represented in this and how important it is for people to have a literal place to go to be able to honor that. Thank you very much for listening to my words.
And I've just a comment or so as we end this. I very much appreciate the very thoughtful people who are here, who have thought about this, who grew up with this person. And for the artists of you here, there are some interesting constraints. There is the $70,000 and the fact that the developers had the right to make the decision on who that was and what happened. Okay, that's something over which we have no power. What I hear is a desire certainly for additional memorial space or content, which would involve more money raising, other things that would go with that. And I think that that's not something you can just say, well, we wish that it was this, or we wish it was that. That involves the actual fact of raising money, being prepared to do that, being prepared to whatever Jolene is talking about with the task force. And I don't know, I'm not suggesting that Link take this on, but I certainly do hear a lot of very passionate interest and devotion to this person, to what she has contributed to, not just to this area, but to the region. So I thank you all very much for being here, for being willing to come and share your thoughts and ideas. And Marcus and Orr, as an educational involvement structure, I think it's really fascinating what you are proposing. So I thank you all very much and hope we will have more time for conversation as we go along. Becky, anything else you want to say?
I was just going to say, Marcus and Orr, do you think you could provide an email for folks that they could reach out to you if they want to share these thoughts, or in case you would also like to continue the conversation with any of the people here tonight? Because as you were saying, this is a dialogue, and this is something that can keep going. And I appreciate the person who is asking, how do we get the Minneapolis Park Rec and City involved? And I think that,
it's a big issue.
I think that that might be something that the Linden Hills History Study Group could, contact somebody at the park board to just ask what that process would be like. Would probably be a good place to start. Joellen, I could probably provide you with some contact people for that process.
Okay.
Just to at least understand what that might be.
Yeah, but I still think we need Link as, because you've been like our 501c3 for things. So if you folks would consider that.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you all very much. It's lovely to meet you even in this arrangement. Okay. Thanks.
You.
Thank you very much.
Thank you all for being here tonight.
Thank you all.
And feel free to stay on. You don't have to leave. Just
yeah, right.
This is over.
Except it's a finance report. I know it'll be fascinating.
Yeah, the finance report is next.
Okay.
Just so.
Okay.
I was going to say I'm happy to put an email in the chat. And for what it's worth, we really hear that Brenda Ueland meant and means a lot to you all. And she lived a whole amazing life, and clearly her legacy, as you said, has wrapped around the world and gone far beyond Minneapolis. And so we very much hope that her legacy and the ongoing life of her work and her vision is not confined to this one project, be it
I just want to dress like her. I don't want to swim across the lake. Okay, maybe we could get that going.
We got options. We got options, Judy. So yeah, this, you know, her legacy means a lot to you all, and our project and our way of honoring her does not have to mean that that is like one and done for her whole expressing her life's work and what she means to the neighborhood. So with that, I will drop our email in the chat and wish you well.
Thank you. Thank you very much, all of you. Okay.
Okay.
And now we're going to get to do budget, you guys. Woo-hoo. All right. Bjorn, are you there? I know you have been. It's been moving around on my. Okay, there you're there. All right, go ahead.
Can you hear me at all?
Yeah,
yes.
we can hear you. Yeah.